So the demo is about deployment step, about the missing ones. So we opened an issue about all the steps that were missing. So this kind of settings, you cannot currently export them with a deployment plan. And we discussed about it during the last triage. And Dean and I made a pull request implementing generic site settings deployment step. So we added a new project called orchardcore.settings.core. Inside, we added a generic class called site settings property deployment step. We also added a deployment source and a deployment step driver. So thanks to this, we are able to call to reference the project in another module, for example, in orchardcore.admin, which has some admin settings. In the startup, you specify that you require orchard.core.deployment, and you can add a deployment source of admin settings. You can add a deployment step driver of admin settings whose title and descriptions are admin settings and description is export the admin settings, and a deployment step factory of admin settings. We used it in different modules and features like the admin, the user, the orchardcore.users module has multiple features like and settings like login settings, registration, reset password, and change email. So we implemented it in modules having settings that don't have secrets. So when you use the code in the startup, you can then declare a new deployment plan and use the new step. For example, the admin settings. And here you can find the title and the description you specified in the startup. So that's an easy way and generic way to implement a deployment plan for your settings in your module.
Thank you. Can you show back the code of the startup? That was the last line I wanted to understand.
Yes.
So this add singleton service, this deployment step factory. This is the, so you need a deployment source and a deployment step factory, right? Okay, and then a deployment step. So what's the difference? I made it, I don't remember. I deployment source is to
export the settings.
Okay, and deployment step factory.
It will allow you to be.
Oh, this is the UI stuff. The description of the step. to declare that there is something that you can export, and the other one is just handling that in the recipe. Okay.
Yeah, that's why we are using the name to generate a unique key based on the name.
And go back. So there is only one. So if you go back to the code in a startup, okay, there is one thing here that is not generic, is the localizer. And because, so here we have a localizer that is resolved because we want to be able to localize the names that we generate in the UI. And to that, you need to resolve the localizer from the class that contains the strings. Otherwise, the PO extractor won't be able to find the correct strings.
Yes.
Ideally, instead of these 4 or these 3 calls to services dot, so the from line 94 to 100, we should have one call that is like services dot register custom settings, and you pass admin settings.
Yes.
You can't.
Yeah. Dim tried to do an extension method, but didn't manage to do it.
So the extension method's no problem, but the PO extractor won't find the localized settings because it looks for a variable named S and then starts.
Yes.
I think that's how it works. So it would be nice to find a way around this, because one of the uses of this feature is to enable users to really easily add deployment steps to their own site settings, not just our ones. But that was the problem with just having a simple extension method.
Yes. So at first I was thinking we could pass also the deployment startup class is an extension method, so we pass 2 classes. But you will now I see that there is still S variable name. That would be an issue because you can't then just pass the strings. You still need to pass the S. Another way would be to cheat and to pass a lambda that will return the strings. That's a way to do that, maybe.
Yeah, I looked at the lambda. I don't know the extractor that well, though. But from what I understood, the lambda looks for a variable named S, not a func. So even passing the middle lambda.
Variable name is, what do you mean? I mean, if you pass a lambda, if the convention is S equal angle bracket uppercase, that should.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know the extractor well enough to understand what it's searching for, but I remember a PR from Hisham recently where it looks for property names. Like, I
know. We need a new, we need to update the extractor. We need a way to declaratively define a string when it's not foundable by code. Like we would just pass the string admin settings and export the admin settings here, but we would add an attribute maybe on the deployment startup class that will say custom localization string and the string for the 2 of them. This way the P extractor will also find that and say, oh, there is a string like this in this class. That could be a way.
Yeah, or even possibly being able to put that attribute on like an admin settings class and put the strings somewhere there as statics or something in some way.
Yeah, so the convention will then be that the string will be found. Well, what I was saying on the startup class is because the string itself will be in this file. So when you want to know which PO file you want to look at, usually we look at the file where the string is. And in this case, the extension method call will be in this config services on the deployment startup class. That's why it will be interesting to have the attributes on the deployment startup class.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. That makes sense.
Just to be able to find the string in which PO file. So okay, interesting. So don't change anything. That's fine because there is no solution. But that will be good to be able to define startup. Well, to define PO extractor attributes to find strings by attributes. Interesting. Okay, we'll have to find an issue. Good. Thank you, Antoine. The idea is that I think Zoltan made a PR that will expose all the settings like this, and there were two issues with that. Is first that settings with secrets will be exported also.
Mm-hmm.
And Zoltan wanted to be able to reuse some logic without having to code a custom export step for each setting. So we suggested that we should have instead an opt-in way of doing the thing. So we provide the automatic way of creating the settings, exporting the settings, but you have to opt in from your module. So you don't have to write any code, but just say, okay, my custom settings has to be exportable automatically with a custom step. And that's what you need. Good job. Thank you.
Yeah, and the next step will be to implement, as you said, the settings that have a secret.
Well, the next step, not the next things to do are to implement exports for this custom deployment source for these settings and not rely on the generic one because the generic one will be too generic for that.